It was one of those mornings in Charleston, you know, the type hot and sticky right from the start. The air felt heavy, like it was clinging to your skin, and the humidity didn't care if you were wearing a Law 3000 linen suit or the cheapest knockoff you could find. It stuck to everyone the same way. But inside the Bel Air Club, it was a different world. The kind of place where everything was polished and perfect. The air was cool, and it smelled faintly of bergamot and citrus. There was a soft hum in the air, the low murmur of moneyed voices, all blending together like background noise, barely noticeable, yet still there. At one of the long outdoor tables under a cream-colored parasol sat Astrid Pinbrook, the founder and CEO of Nexera, a blockchain security firm that was making waves in the tech world. Astrid didn't look out of place here, not at all. Everything about her screamed control: the way she sat, her posture, even the fake laugh she flashed when someone cracked a joke she didn't find funny. It was all carefully constructed. Around her sat a group of tech venture capitalists, logistics CEOs, and a crypto influencer with perfect teeth. They weren't here for the crab toast or blood orange mimosas. They were sizing each other up. And Astrid was the star of this little show. She played the room like a seasoned keynote speaker, quick jabs, subtle little stories that positioned her as brilliant and misunderstood. And while the crowd hung on her every word, Kean Ridley, a waiter at the club, adjusted the tray on his forearm and approached her table. He'd been working here on Sundays for the last 7 months, ever since he'd cut back on his hours at the university library to focus on his thesis. His shirt was slightly faded at the collar, and his glasses had a dark ring around them from the sweat, but he didn't seem to mind. He carried himself with a stillness that made people underestimate him. "Apologies for the delay," he said calmly as he set down her latte. There was a brief stall with the espresso line. "I appreciate your patience." Astrid didn't look up immediately. She let the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to notice it. Then, when she finally glanced at him, her smile wasn't a smile at all. It was the kind of smile that said, "You're not worth the breath it would take to respond properly." She raised her cup and muttered, "Good thing you're not coding nuclear launch systems, huh?" A few people chuckled, not at the joke, but at the way Astrid had sliced through Kean's moment with just a few words. But Kean didn't flinch. He gave a polite nod and turned to walk away, but Astrid wasn't done. "Wait," she said, swatting the air like she was flicking away a fly. "Could you make sense of this?" She pointed at a crumpled piece of paper on the table, passed to her by Dieter Vins, a VY-siding fintech executive. "I don't know what this is." "Dutch, maybe." "Translate it for me, Kean." It was an easy setup, right? She was expecting him to fumble, expecting him to struggle with some foreign language in front of all these important people. But Kean, with his worn shirt and dark-rimmed glasses, didn't play along. He picked up the note, examined it for a moment, then began translating it into Dutch. His pronunciation was so sharp that even Dieter, the one who had written it, sat up straighter in his chair. Kean didn't stop there. He followed it up with an English translation, taking a moment to explain that the correct verb choice was actually begaliden instead of Leiden, given the context of a cross-border data contract. It was precise. No arrogance. No theatrics. Just the truth. The table went quiet. Astrid blinked, just a little too slowly. She hadn't expected this. But Kean didn't stick around for applause. He returned the note, gave a courteous nod, and turned to walk back toward the kitchen entrance with the same steady pace he'd carried all morning. Something had shifted. It was like the room had gotten a little smaller, a little tighter. Astrid could feel the eyes on her. Her latte sat untouched, her fingers tightening just slightly around the cup. No one said anything, but their silence spoke volumes. Finally, Astrid, trying to regain control, forced a chuckle and said, "I like when people surprise me. It's refreshing." But her words didn't carry the same weight they usually did. Not when the room was thinking about Kean, not when they were seeing him in a different light. Back in the kitchen, Kean leaned against the stainless steel counter, still processing what had just happened. Santiago, his coworker, raised an eyebrow as he washed dishes. "You good?" Santiago asked, looking him over. Yeah, Kian replied, with a small shrug. Just didn't expect to be tested on Dutch syntax over lattes. Santiago chuckled. Man, you just made Astrid Pembroke look like she Googled how to spell her own last name. Kian cracked a smile, but he wasn't trying to embarrass her. I wasn't trying to embarrass her. Santiago laughed again. That's what made it sting. You didn't even try. Out on the patio, the mood had shifted. Astrid tried to steer the conversation back into business, but it was too late. She wasn't the center of attention anymore. Kian, meanwhile, went about his work, unaffected by the drama that had unfolded. He was calm, methodical, his mind still focused on his thesis, not the small power games being played in the front. But Astrid's mind, it was spinning. She wasn't used to losing control like this. She wasn't used to being the one everyone remembered for the wrong reasons. The next morning, Astrid was at a panel discussion, scheduled to talk about adaptive leadership in tech. But her mind wasn't on her talk. It was on the brunch. On Kian. The whole world had shifted, and she hadn't been ready for it. Across town, Kian was meeting with representatives from Vince Global, a leading firm in the fintech space. They were impressed. They wanted him on their team. He didn't brag. He didn't mention the brunch. He just let his work speak for itself. Kian hadn't been looking for this moment. He hadn't been looking to prove anything. But sometimes, when you stand your ground and just tell the truth, people have no choice but to listen. Meanwhile, Astrid's world was starting to crumble, quietly, slowly. The brunch incident hadn't made headlines, but it had traveled. Whispers at board meetings, subtle comments in interviews. She could feel the distance in people's respect for her. The focus had subtly shifted. She tried to control the narrative, but it was slipping through her fingers. Kian, on the other hand, was steady. He had the quiet power now. People were asking for his insight, for his presence, not just because he was smart, but because he carried himself in a way that made people stop and rethink who deserved to be at the table. A few weeks later, after finishing up his part-time job at the Bel Air Club, Kian walked out with his apron in hand, his head a little higher than when he first started. It wasn't about escaping the job, it was about doing it the right way, with dignity. And as for Astrid, she kept pushing forward, kept talking, kept building her empire. But something inside her had changed. She wasn't the same person who walked into that brunch anymore. She had learned the hard way that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the one that commands respect. Kian had proved that. And while she might not have realized it then, it was his quiet strength that would be remembered. And as we look back at that brunch, the question remains, who really won that day? Was it the woman with the power, the control, the reputation? Or was it the quiet, steady man who didn't need to prove a thing? Tell me what you think in the comments below. Do you think Astrid will ever get her control back? Or is Kian the one who holds all the cards now?